Currently, Unity supports two ways of handling input. The old way, known as the input manager, which comes pre-enabled when creating a new project, and the new input system, which needs to be installed through the package manager. The input system package is a newer, more flexible system which allows you to use any kind of input device to control your Unity content. Some may wish to stick with the old input manager, especially when doing quick prototyping since it's already pre-installed, but personally, I prefer to use the new input system as it's much more robust, and at the end of this video, you'll be able to make a Unity package which you can import into your future project for a quick and easy setup. Let's begin. Okay, so first thing you want to do is we want to install the package. So you go Window, Package Manager, and then we want to change this. If it's not Unity Registry, we want to change it to Unity Registry. In here, we'll type in input. I already have it installed, but for you, hit my stay install, let it install. It'll ask to restart the program. Click the yes. After that, we're going to start creating our scripts. So create, make a folder structure first. Scripts, spell it right. Scripts. And here, we'll create another folder, input. And then within here, we're going to go create input actions. We'll call this player controls. Now this is important. We need to enable generate C# class. And then we want to double click this to open up the UI. Now I want to create an action map here. This will be for the player control, so that's called player. You may want a second action map for something like a menu if you plan on using different controls, but for now we'll stick with this. New action. We will start with the left stick. So double click to rename, we'll call this left stick. The type will not be of button. The action type will be pass-through, and then the control type will be a vector2. An analog returns a vector2, an X and a Y value. Expand this, there's no binding currently, so we'll change this to left stick gamepad, as you can see here in the menu. And then we also want to add a binding for the keyboard. So we want to add an up, down, left, right composite binding. We'll just call this keyboard. Of course, up will be W on the keyboard. Down will be S on the keyboard, which is here. Left will be A on the keyboard. And right will be D on the keyboard. Now we want to save asset. Let's close this for now. Now we're going to create our first unique script. Go create C# script. We'll call this input container. Double click to open. Okay, so for now we're going to remove these start and update functions. And we're working on the left stick, which is a vector2. So we'll go public vector2 left stick. Also, this object will not be attached to an object in the game, so we can remove this mono behavior since we don't need it. Let's save that. Okay. We're going to go back. We're going to create another script. We're going to call this input handler. We're going to double click to open this once it's compiled. Delete these for now. Now we want to create our input container object. Let's just call input container equals new input container. We also want to create an object of our input system. We called ours player controls. So type in player controls. We're going to call this keys. And then we'll bring back our start method, and keys will equal new player controls. Next thing we want to do is enable the keys. So keys.enable. Okay. So let's receive the input from our controller through our keys object and assign it to the value in our input container. So we'll go keys dot player, which was the action map we created, dot left stick, which was the input we're looking for, dot performed, which is the event, plus equals I. So we're subscribing I to the event, and I will hold the return value, equals greater than input container dot left stick equals I dot read value vector2 open close brackets semicolon. Okay, so this may seem complicated, but it's quite simple. We have our keys, which is our object, player is the action map, left stick is the input, performed is the event, then we subscribe I to the event, and then this is called a lambda expression. So our input container dot left stick value will be I, read the value of it as a vector2. Okay, so now we can test this already. So let's just make a method, void test input. We'll just go debug.log input container dot left stick. Save that. Come back to our game. We're gonna, in the hierarchy here, we're gonna create a new object called input handler. We're going to assign the input handler object. And now if we press play, oh, one thing we forgot is to call our new method. So let's create an update method, and then we'll call the test input method from within this. Let that compile. Press play. Now as you can see, 0 zeros are printed out currently. 0 on the X, 0 on the Y. If we press A on our keyboard, we can see that X turns to -1. If we press D on our keyboard, we can see that X turns to a +1. If we press W, Y is a +1. If we press A, Y is a -1. Sorry, S. That's the button I pressed, S. This also works for the controller, so I'm currently holding an Xbox controller here. If I move the left analog over, you see these values currently change. The difference between a keyboard and an analog stick is the analog stick can vary between 0 and 1, whereas the keyboard is just a button, which is off or on. So we're either 0 or 1 or -1. Perfect. And of course, the right stick will be basically the same. So let's just double click this, bring this back up. This time we will duplicate this. Let's rename this to right stick. These can stay the same. Expand this. This time will be right stick gamepad. And usually the right stick is used for the camera in most games. So we're going to delete this binding, and instead we're going to add a new one. And this will be the mouse. Don't know why that didn't come up there. Let's try again. Path, mouse, delta. Save asset. Let's go back to our scripts. In our input container, we can now add right stick. And then on our input handler, if we just come to the end of this line and then press Ctrl D, that will duplicate it. And now we'll assign the right stick to the input container right stick. And let's just change this now to right stick for testing. Let's go back to our game, let this compile. Let's close this for now, press play. Currently 0, but if I start moving my mouse, you can see these values change widely. No longer touching the mouse. Let's go over to the controller. Start moving the right stick. We can see these values change. Great. So that's how we do analog sticks. But what about buttons? Let's create a new script. We'll call this one button container. Let this compile. Open. Let's remove all these methods. Also, same as input container, the button container won't be attached to any object, so we can remove this mono behavior. And the two states the button will be in will rather be pressed. Sometimes we might want to check if the button's being held. So we'll go public bool with 2 O's, pressed and held. First we'll work on pressed. Let's go back to our object. Let's add a new action. The first input we'll work on is the A on the controller. If this was a PlayStation controller, it would be X. Maybe it's used for jumping. We'll leave this as type button. Go to our binding. We will go south. Button south gamepad is what we want to use. And then for our keyboard binding, add binding, and let's just put this as spacebar since at the moment we're pretending it's going to be jump. Obviously you can change this to suit your own game. Save asset. Go back to our scripts. Now if we go to our input container again, we'll do public button container. We'll call this A underscore input. And now since this is our own custom object, let's create a constructor for our input container. So we'll go public input container and then A input equals new button container. Let's save that. Go back to our input handler. And now after our right stick, let's go keys player dot A. Now instead of performed, this time we want to check if the button is pressed. So we'll go dot started is the event we're looking for. Let's do subscribe with I equals greater than input container dot A input dot pressed equals I dot read value. Now we can't read a boolean, but what we can do is read it as a float and then check if that float is greater than 0, then the button is being pressed, so return true. If not, return false. Let's just test this. So let's change this printout to say A pressed. And let's just add a condition. If input container dot A input dot pressed, let's just indent this, save, Go back to our game. Let's close this. Press play. Currently nothing's being printed out. Let's hit A. As you see, it's being printed out, but it's being printed out continuously. The reason for that is A is never being set back to false again. So this will be an easy enough fix. Let's just go back. So what we want to do is, on our input container, let's create a new method. Let's say public void reset inputs. Now a input dot pressed equals false, and then our input handler. What we could do in our input handler, let's add a late update. So if you don't know, a delayed update occurs after the update. So it happens at the end of every frame. So most of our logic within the game will be done with an update, but then we'll come along with the late update and reset the input. So we'll go input container dot reset inputs. Let's save that. Come back to your game. Press play. Let's hit A. As we can see this time, it's only printed out once. Let's hold down A. Still only pressed once. If we go to our keyboard, spacebar, printed out once, hold down, only once. Perfect. And of course, every other button will be the same, no matter if it's a face button like A, B, X, or Y, or if it's a shoulder button like RB, RT, LT, and so on, or even clicking down the analog sticks. But what about if we want to capture holding in the button? It's a little bit different, but it's still quite easy. So if we go to our input handler script, let's create a new method. It will return a bool. We'll call this get button held status. This will take in an input action phase called phase. And as you see, when we use this, it's going to import the input system. Let's just remove these for now since we're not using them. Okay, so now we're going to go return phase equals input action phase dot perform. Okay, so now to map the held status of A, we can't do this in the start because what start is doing is, it's subscribing to the A press event, and it will always assign the value to our A input. But for capturing the button held value, we want to do this in update. So let's just make a bit of room here. The way this works is we go input container dot A input dot held this time. We go equal get button held status, and this time we go keys dot player dot A dot phase, and that gives it the current phase that input is in. Let's change this now, our test, to held, and we'll say A is held. Save that, come back to our game, press play. Currently nothing's being touched. Let's press A. As you can see, held's being printed out. got printed out 65 times within that short moment. But if I hold it down, it'll keep being printed out. Same if I hold down the spacebar, it'll keep being printed out. And that's it. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add the rest of the inputs. Okay, so I've just added B, X, and Y. I'm capturing when they're pressed. I'm also capturing when they're held. In our input container, I added the resets as well. As you can see, I just added them to the button container list as well. Let's go back to your game, test. Let's press A, let's press B, let's press X in our controller, and let's press Y. Perfect. And that's it. If you want to add right shoulder button, left click in, it all works the exact same. Now the great thing about this is we can reuse this in multiple projects. So once you've got this fully set up, we can select everything in this folder and then go export package. Export. I already have a package here with the same name, but you can call this import or input or whatever you want. And then when you create a new Unity project, you can just drag and drop this with full controller support already set up.